So last time we ended at the definition of equilibrium, and there we learned that demand and supply of any one good must be equal, in the sense that that with which they came in total must be that with which they leave. Okay, so now this condition, this will hold at equilibrium, and in between they will trade, right? Okay, now if we take a typical market, for example, market for good one, then what happens is that this equation, it allows us to define an excess demand function. So for example, excess demand function for good one, for good one with respect to A, that is consumer A, it will be, it's right like this. So this is the demand at the equilibrium price, okay? Yeah. Sorry, not equilibrium. So let's say this is the, let's put it like this. Okay. So this is the demand, okay, of good one by consumer A at any prices P1, P2, okay, and the endowment with which he had come is this. So this, if this is positive, then obviously it defines, or it states excess demand. So you want more than you already have, or in negative it will see, it will talk about supply. So let us denote this by this notation, okay. So excess demand of consumer A for good one at some price P1, P2. Now, similarly, we can define E for consumer B for good one P1, P2, right? Okay. All right. And then if I sum these two up, then I get the aggregate excess demand function, okay, Z1, P1, P2 as this. Okay. So given there are two consumers from the start in our model, and we are talking about only one good, so in that goods market, the aggregate excess demand, that is the excess demand made by person 1 and person 2, or consumer 1 and consumer 2. So that's our aggregate excess demand function. Okay. And similarly, we can have that for good 2 as well. So for good 2 also, we will have a function which looks just like this. So Z2, P1, P2. So this is for good 2. Remember this, or note this, okay, that I am writing all of this given any price set, okay? But this, okay, this is at equilibrium, but here this, okay, this is for any price set. Okay. Now we will go by, Okay, so these two equations that we have got, they are summed over goods, right? So these are aggregate excess demand. This is summed over good 1, and this is summed over good 2, right? Okay. Now, just to construct a different kind of an equation, uh, more because we want to understand something else also. Let's construct them by individuals, in the sense that here we have for each good. Let us construct the same thing for each individual. Now, if we go for each individual, so for each individual, we said that at equilibrium, utility must be maximized. So that means for each individual, whatever happens, budget constant must be satisfied. So let's look at the budget constant of A. Okay, so that budget constant is just the standard one that we have studied in consumer behavior. So there are two goods for consumer A. This is what you buy, and this is the amount of money or endowment, whatever you say. Okay, this is with which he arrived. So our M of A that we have denoted. All right, now following this notation, okay, following this excess demands notation for each of the individuals, okay, and then following this capital Z notation, what you have is, I'm not going into the details. So I'll write like this, that following EA1 and Z1 and so on. Okay, we can write this. So what are you doing here? We are taking this WA1 on this side. So it will be X1, XA1 minus WA1, right? And we are replacing it by, okay, EA1, okay? Just we have defined earlier. All right, so if I write like this, then this becomes 0, right? And similarly, you will have for individual B also. Okay, so I'm not going into details now because all of this, they can be easily derived. It's just simple addition and subtraction. Given, remember how we defined in general this excess demand function for one good and one individual, and also how we define this aggregate excess demand functions. Okay, so now these two, they will simultaneously hold, right? Because budget constant has to be satisfied. Okay, now if I, budget constant are always there. So if I now do this, see on the right hand side we have zeros, right? So let us add them together, but in a different fashion. How do I add this? Add it like this. Okay, and this EA1, EB1, and then P2, EA2, and EB2 equal to 0. All right, and this gives us our aggregate excess demand functions, these two, multiplied with product prices equals 0. So what do we have here? What do we have here? We had, see, we had two markets, right, for two goods. And in those two markets, we had their excess demands on a market basis. Why on a market basis? Because we added the excess demand of the two individuals involved. So here I have the excess demand in the second market, or for good 2, you can say whatever you want. I mean, any of the two. And this Z1 is the aggregate excess demand for good 1 or in market 1. Now, multiplied with the corresponding product prices, it sums up to 0, right? That's what it says. Okay. Now this says that if there exists positive excess demand in market 1 or 2, then there exists negative excess demand in market 2 or 1, right? Because if that is not true, then this equation doesn't hold. You see, by definition, we have construction. We want a construction by our structure. P1 and P2, they are non-negative, right? And for the time being, okay. So they are non-negative. Now, if I make one of them 0, then naturally, if I make P1 0, okay, then trivially excess demand in market 2, that becomes 0. So that means if I make P1 0, then what happens is I suddenly get market 2 in isolation, right? I do not have to consider an equation which will have two markets together. Okay, let me say it in case of P2. So let's say if P2 is 0, then this part it vanishes, right? So we have P1 Z1 equal to 0, right? And that's correct, because we are looking for that price which will make the excess demand going to 0. Okay, or a market, if considered in isolation, it is in balance. But if I take P1, P2, both of them non-zero or positive, okay, if I take both of them positive, then the only way this equation equals 0 is that if I have excess demand here, then I have excess supply here, okay? And that comes directly from the budget constraint. And remember, in writing the budget constraint, we do not write the equilibrium prices, right? So what does it say? This result, this is specifically what is called Walras law. Okay, so let's say it a bit formally. What Walras law say is that at any set of prices, and this is the most important phrase, any set of prices. Okay, so Walras law is not made for equilibrium set of prices. Obviously in equilibrium it will hold, but it will hold for any set of prices. Why? Because this law talks about excess demand in aggregate sense. In aggregate sense, in what? See, we talked about two kinds of aggregates. First, we aggregated over individuals, right? So for example, Z1, it has aggregated excess demand over the two consumers. But in this equation, we have aggregated it over all the markets. So if I look at this equation, it's aggregated over all markets, right? All markets. So that's what Walras law says, that at any set of prices, aggregate demand of all markets, okay, all markets is 0. All right. So that means you cannot have, I mean, if you consider n markets, or let's say, let's make it smaller, if you consider these two markets together, then you cannot have excess demand or excess supply. But yes, if you consider one market out of these two, then you can have excess demand or excess supply at any set of prices. But if you have excess demand in one market at any arbitrarily chosen set of prices, then it will tell you that, okay, market 1 has excess demand, so that means market 2 has excess supply. Okay, so that's the important thing. First is that it is for any set of prices, and because it is for any set of prices, it takes all the markets, or all markets for all the goods together. Okay, that's how it is for any set of prices. So obviously it will hold for equilibrium set of prices, But the power of the law is that if you take all the markets together, there cannot be an outstanding excess demand always. Okay, that cannot, we cannot have that. All right. But that also said something else. You see, it also says that if we look at the Z1 and Z2, okay, let's erase the Walras law and let's go to something very different. Okay, something very, very different. Let's say these Z1 and Z2 are vectors. Okay, we can say that. Let's say these Z1 and Z2 are vectors. Now, what we are saying is that for any P1, P2, this sums up to 0. This sums up to 0 with not all P, all Pi, let's say, all Pi is 0, or with not all, not P1, comma P2, both 0, right? All right. We have said that prices are non-negative, but obviously you are not considering that in such a case where P1 and P2 are both 0, because in that case, working on this model doesn't carry any meaning. So at least we have to consider that at least one of them is, one of them may be 0, but the other it cannot. And also, obviously in equilibrium we have always wanted prices, we want in our mind prices to be positive, but let's for the time being say we take a normal scenario where P1 and P2 are positive. Okay, so what we have here is that these two are vectors. Okay, they are summed by multiplying P1 and P2, okay, which are for our purpose positive numbers. Okay, so just to just to say something different, to give a different interpretation, basically we are looking at a linear combination, right? In terms of vectors, we are looking at a linear combination. And not only that, we are saying the Walras's law, what it states is that this linear combination, it gives a dependent set of vectors, right? That's what it is, right? To satisfy this equation, we do not need both P1 and P2 0. Only in that case they will be linearly independent. So as long as this equation holds for any set of prices, we can choose two positive prices and we can then also have this sum equal to 0, right? Which looks very similar to our linear combination of vectors, and it is true. So this says that then Z1 and Z2 as vectors are linearly dependent, right? So that's, I'm just borrowing something that we have learned earlier. So they are linearly dependent. We in microeconomics, in general equilibrium, we say it using a different word. We just say that markets are dependent. That's what we say, right? We say that markets are dependent. Okay, and that's how we arrive at this result. Markets are dependent from this equation. It's a simple application. Now, given this, what we have is that if it is true that these two vectors, I'll say it again, are linearly dependent, then let's go a bit further. Linear algebra tells us that if we have a dependent set of vectors, then at least one of them can be expressed as a linear combination of all others, right? I'm going to say it again. If we have a dependent set of vectors, then we have this result that one of the vectors can be expressed as a linearly independent sum of the other vectors, or sum of the other vectors. Okay. Now here what we have, here that result here translates into this fact that n markets are independent, sorry, n markets are dependent, and that we get from Walras law. But we have n minus 1 markets as independent, in the sense that, what does it mean? It means the result that we just stated. It means that if we can solve for n minus 1 markets, okay, then if we can solve for n minus 1 markets, then there is no need to solve for the nth market. If we can solve for n minus 1 markets, then there is no need to solve for the nth market. So how do we get that? How do we get the results how do we get the result for the nth market? We get it using Walras law. So we get it using Walras law. Okay, so that's how we get it. We solve for n minus 1 and then we get using Walras law. But this again has some problem. Let's view it from this equation. So you're saying that this holds at any prices, any price set. So that means I can write it like this, right? And that means that Z1 is basically minus Z2, right? So that gives our relation between excess demand and excess supply multiplied by P2 by P1. Okay, and this means that however may we try, if we have our excess demand, excess supply numbers, then this sentence becomes true, that if we can solve for n minus 1 markets, then there is no need to solve for the nth market. And here actually we cannot. So we have excess demand or excess supply, whatever it may be, as the relation between Z1 and minus Z2, and they are connected by P2 by P1. So that's our old relative price. Okay, that our old relative price. And this is the reason, as I said, that we'll come back to the relative price argument again. So this is the reason why knowing the relative price is sufficient, and we cannot actually find P1 and P2 separately because they are dependent, right? So we have given P2 by P1 some fixed A. We can have infinite set of P1 comma P2 which satisfied that relation that their relative price is A. So earlier we showed it in a different fashion, but this is a far more stronger argument, and more so because it comes from Walras law. Essentially, if you can view it through linear algebra, then it's just very simple. We have a dependent set of vectors, and since we have a dependent set of vectors, we can express one vector using another set of vectors which are linearly independent. Okay, and if we can do that, then we cannot have two prices separately. We have the relative price, and that will suffice. So if you solve a problem, then keeping in mind the fact that you have to maximize utility, you have to equate the demand and supply, end of the day you are going to have this relative price. So what is our culture? I told you that our culture is that we take P1 equal to 1 and express P2. Okay, so enough of that. Now we are going to learn about the properties of these excess demand functions. And these properties, they will tell you why we have been able to compare this result with linear algebra. Okay. So properties, what are they? Number one is that our excess demand functions, okay, they are homogeneous of degree 0. In P1 and P2, but that's normal. That's how that this is the reason that you multiply P1 and P2 by any k, and you'll get in return you will get the same equation. As a sub result, what you already showed, that ED basically is a function of P2 by P1 or P1 by P2, whatever you prefer. And the third, okay, or rather I'll write 2 because this is just a sub result. It is that aggregate excess demand function. So that's what we just wrote. Aggregate excess demand function is continuous in prices. Is continuous in prices. Okay, and this is necessary. It is why do we need this? It is needed. It is needed to ensure competitive equilibrium. Okay, so let's look at this. Let's look at this second condition as a mathematical requirement, which it is. It is a purely mathematical requirement, but it is a requirement as well, that aggregate excess demand functions, they are continuous in prices. Okay, now you can have another assumption which will serve the same purpose. So you can have, instead of saying that aggregate excess demand function is continuous in prices, which is kind of very mathematical. If you want to have something which sounds like more economics, you can say that each consumer is small. Small in what sense? They are small in relation to the size of the market. So that is saying in different words that the first assumption of a competitive market, that buyers and sellers are infinite, in the sense that no one can induce the direction the market price may take. So no one can do that. And instead of saying aggregate demand is continuous, you can say each consumer is small relative to the market size, and it will give you the same result. Now, so what we saw here is that in summary, what we saw that if we start with the apparatus of Walrasian structure or general equilibrium structure, that we start with endowment and everything, and then if we have the demand supply equality, okay, then we can easily actually show that our assumption of competitive market setup with price taking consumers, they don't harm our Pareto efficiency setup. And not only that, we can write a theorem, right? A theorem which is known as the first fundamental welfare theorem. So we have seen how Walrasian equilibrium, how general exchange in consumption works in general equilibrium. We have also seen how we can connect with assuming perfect competition, how we can relate the two things, right? And how we can get the relative prices. And doing all that basically leads us to two welfare theorems, which are important. Okay, the first one is straightforward, and the second one is not so straightforward. Okay, so welfare theorems, right? So there are two. So first one is first fundamental theorem of welfare economics, right? So that's quite long. And then you have the second fundamental theorem of welfare economics. So what is the first one? The first one is pretty simple. It says when markets are complete, when markets are complete, any, and that's huge word, any competitive equilibrium is Pareto optimal. Okay. And let me add a much stronger word, necessarily Pareto optimal. So that said, what it basically says is that if I start with a competitive equilibrium, then I can show that it is Pareto optimal. Right? Okay. Now, obviously, one of the natural query is what about the converse of this statement? Okay, and the converse of the statement is obviously a bit difficult to achieve. But before going into that, let me say the meaning of this word complete. Okay, what does complete mean? Okay, so complete means that number one is agents are selfish. Okay, that's a bad word. So we write it like this: agents care about their own. So that's like using a lot of words. You are basically saying that agents are selfish. Number two is that there is no externality, and that means I'm not consuming something in such a way that it is actually reducing your utility, right? If it does that always, then there is no way I can be better off without making you without rather not making you worse off, because you are already worse off just because I'm consuming something. Okay, so that's like if you look at the garbage trucks, yeah, and their emission levels, you can see the what we mean here by externality. Okay, number three is, since price taking behavior, or what we said as the consumers being small. Okay, so price taking behavior, it basically sounds like, it basically means that you go to a shop and you try to bargain. No, you don't try to bargain, because if you try to bargain, there is no result, no one will listen to you. So price taking behavior, you are too small. And number four, we mentioned it at last, and that says aggregate demand, aggregate excess demand function is continuous. Okay, so there are too many things in a very small place. So instead of saying when markets are complete, so let's erase that. When I'm saying that agents are selfish, there is an externality of in consumption or of consumption. Okay, and there is price taking behavior, and aggregate excess demand function is continuous. Then we can have, so any competitive equilibrium necessarily to be Pareto optimal. So that means we start with a competitive equilibrium and you derive to show that it is Pareto optimal. But it has some undesired implications. One implication is that it doesn't talk about equality. And not only that, if you have an inequality, if you have stark inequality, then there is no problem with this. That is not a problem with this theorem. So what I'm saying is that the final allocation, all right, it depends heavily on initial. So in other words, your inheritance, kind of. So final allocation depends heavily on initial allocation. So where do we start? Okay. And it goes to this sentence goes to quite an extent. It basically says that if a person started with everything, it's okay. So the formal sentence is there in notes. Okay. So it's okay to end up with everything. Right? It's okay to end up with everything. That's what it says. And that is not really good. I mean, that's our sense will say, right? That independent of whether we can prove things or not, if this kind of a thing that someone own everything after at the efficiency point just because he owed everything in the start, that's not very good. So can there be any way, so now that is the question, can there be any way which by which or using which we can have our desired Pareto optimality as a result of perfect competition? So what do we want? We want desirable, we want, there is some desire, okay. Now we want our desirable, okay, let's write this, our desired Pareto optimal point to result through perfect competition. Okay, so understand the question. We can organize perfect competition, but and we know that if we can organize perfect competition, it will be Pareto optimal. But we also observe that there may be Pareto optimal states with one having everything and others nothing, which is not definitely good. So now the question is that if I have a desired Pareto optimal point, so let's say we have to reach some point, can we reach that using perfect competition? Okay, and that leads us to the second theorem, which we'll discuss in the next session.